Hi, folks. I hope you're having a nice day. Today is April 20th, 2020, and I'm going to do just a very short talk for you on nonprofits, benefit corporations, and B Corps. So let's go over here to our materials. So the first thing I'd like to talk about today is nonprofits. You've got some of this information in your slides on business organizations, and I talk about it there. But how does a nonprofit differ from a for-profit corporation? All right, well, two main differences. So one of the, I guess the essential differences is that nonprofits are intended to be for the public benefit. Okay, a corporation is generally for the benefit of its owners, all right, under the traditional sense. A nonprofit is for the benefit of the public, all right. So here on the screen, what you see is page 6 of the Iowa Principles and Practices for Charitable Nonprofit Excellence, 2016 edition. I put a copy of this in the SharePoint folder. If you want to look at it, you don't have to read it. It's lengthy, it's 55 pages. But if you're interested in nonprofits, it's an excellent resource. I used to teach a class in nonprofit organizational effectiveness through the Center for Nonprofits, which is here at Iowa out of the law school. All right, so in here, page 6, starting off this guide, the role of charitable nonprofit organizations. All right, nonprofits kind of occupy a third sector. We have government that provides for some things, we have private industry that provides for some things, and then nonprofits, we often talk about kind of filling that service gap. There are lots of different nonprofits out there, everything from University of Iowa hospitals and clinics and the University of Iowa itself. Those are nonprofits, those are very large, down to your local animal shelter or food bank, all right, which tend to be smaller kinds of nonprofits. In the principles and practices here, one of the first things that we say, charitable nonprofits must be publicly open and accountable, must be well managed, and must continuously build trust with the public by appropriate financial reporting, communications with the public about significant contributions to the community with the charity's funds and programs, and strongly evident commitment to ethical behavior. So a nonprofit corporation has additional requirements in transparency, in reporting about its activities, and in how it is constituted. So if you look at the articles of incorporation for a nonprofit, they have to specify right in there what the public benefit is for which it is incorporated. Often it's something that is in the nature of scientific, educational, or otherwise charitable. All right. Whereas a private corporation is organized purely, not purely, but often primarily for a money earning motive. Now, it's important to know that nonprofits have to have revenue as well. So Sandy Boyd, who I used to teach with, would say, no money, no mission. All right. So it's important that your nonprofit does bring in money in order to do the things that you want it to do. But that money doesn't belong to the shareholders or to any one person. Essentially, nonprofits hold everything they have, all their assets, in a public trust for the benefit of the public. Okay, so if you have a nonprofit, you acquire, assets like maybe vehicles and equipment and cash on hand. If your nonprofit is ever dissolved or goes away, you have to have a provision in your articles of incorporation that would send those assets to another nonprofit, right? So if your nonprofit closes, you don't get to keep that stuff. So why is that public trust doctrine important? Well, for a lot of reasons. So one of the benefits of being a nonprofit, if you were incorporated that way, is that you can then apply for federal tax exemption depending on the status of your nonprofit. And there are different ways you can apply for that. You may have heard of 501c3 nonprofit corporations. These are corporations that have applied for nonprofit status, both for their own revenue and also for the donations sent to them by their constituents. So maybe you get a letter in the mail asking you to send money to the Southern Poverty Law Center to fight hate crimes, right? And suppose you send them $100. Okay, well, you would be able to deduct that $100 donation on your personal income tax return, subject to all the crazy tax rules. I'm not giving you tax advice, right? But in general. And that nonprofit also does not have to pay an income tax on the money it receives. All right, so that's a substantial benefit of being a nonprofit, is that you don't pay taxes, and that people who donate to you may be able to get a tax benefit through their donation. In exchange for that, you have to be more accountable and you have to share information. If you're curious about a nonprofit, I like to use guidestar.org, GUIDESTAR.org. And you can go there and you can research a nonprofit. It may have their public tax filings and other information, so you can kind of see how they do business. Okay, that's a very, very quick guide to nonprofits, but this semester it's going to suffice. Now let's talk about two new categories of entities that are sort of in between the for-profit and the not-for-profit world. So I'd like to talk a little bit about benefit corporations and certified B Corps. All right, and this is all very new. And honestly, in Iowa, we don't have either of these yet, but I will show you some proposed legislation. Okay, so one of the things that I've put in the SharePoint for you to skim through is an entrepreneur's guide to certified B corporations and benefit corporations. All right, so this would be something that I would just kind of skim through, but I would go ahead and read this first part here, and I want to go through some pertinent parts. All right, so benefit corporations and B corporations are different things. They sound similar. Let's talk about what the difference is. Okay, a benefit corporation is an actual legal entity structure that you can choose in certain states for your company. Okay, a benefit corporation has provisions written into its articles of incorporation or other organizing document that says we are going to consider the greater community in addition to our shareholders when we make business decisions. And that can take different forms. That can include decisions about purchasing and sourcing and selling, all the way up to big decisions like who do we sell our company to, or we're getting a hostile takeover bid from a company that we don't think is going to be environmentally responsible. They're offering X dollars per share more than the next suitor. Do we have to sell to the highest bidder or not? And if we don't, do we get sued by our shareholders? All right, so there's some information in here about some of those legal things. I think the big takeaway right now is this is very new and the law is not really settled on these yet, but the intent of a benefit corporation is to alleviate a little bit that idea of shareholder primacy, which is that every decision we make has to be based strictly on profit and we can't consider anything else. So the benefit corporation attempts to take the stakeholder model that we have discussed so much in class and write that into the legal documents, okay, to allow the corporation more flexibility to consider stakeholders and not just share price and dividends, okay? So I've highlighted a few things here along those lines. You know, a benefit corporation is required by its articles to consider all of the stakeholders like community, environment, employees, and customers when making business decisions. All right, and it says in theory that should give the company a little more protection when making business decisions. All right. Shareholder derivative suits are something that we talk about in the lecture on business organizations. And you might remember Schlensky versus Wrigley. Okay, that's where some shareholders sued the Chicago Cubs saying, they should have night games. All right. And shareholder derivative suits are not common. I don't want to make you think they happen all the time, but they happen enough that you have to be mindful of it. So this is intended to give um, a little more leeway to the managers of the corporation if they're making decisions with the whole community in mind, and not just the share price. Now, as I mentioned, Iowa does not have a benefit corporation legal structure yet. There has been legislation introduced on this. The most recent one I could find was in 2019. I put this proposed legislation in the SharePoint folder. You don't have to read it if you don't want to. I don't know how much you're interested in these things. I'm interested kind of a lot, okay? But let me highlight just a couple key parts. So first is the definition. Benefit corporation means a for-profit corporation, so that's important. We're not talking about nonprofits that are specifically organized for the public trust. This is a for-profit intended to operate in a responsible and sustainable manner to produce a public benefit or benefits as set forth in the public benefit provision in the documents, and to otherwise operate in a manner that considers the best interests of those materially affected by its conduct. So this is a really interesting kind of hybrid corporation, really. We are for-profit, we have shareholders, we're managing for a profit, but we also have a public benefit and we're managing towards that, okay? And how would this proposed legislation hold companies accountable in Iowa? Well, if we go down here, and remember, this is proposed, this has not been adopted yet, although I expect in the next few years something like it will be. They put in here periodic statements and reports. So if you remember back to the slide that we had on the body shop where the founder said, what if companies produce environmental audit? What if they produce a community audit or a community report each year? This proposed Iowa legislation would include that, right? So they would talk about, no less than biennially here, how are we doing on our public benefits, right? What have we done to fulfill what we have written in as a public benefit for our company? And that could be things like community justice, that could be environmental standards, paying a living wage, all different kinds of things. So I thought that was interesting and worthwhile to talk about. Many states, 31 states as of the writing of this document, have benefit corporations. I have had clients ask me if we could create those in Iowa, and the answer right now is no, we can't. We can do things that are similar to that, but I do hope that Iowa will adopt that. So that's the benefit corporation, a legal entity that has some changed legal goals and requirements. Now, the third and final topic that I'd like to cover is the certified B corporation. So this is kind of different. It sounds a lot like benefit corporation. The B certification is, as this document says, the functional equivalent of like a fair trade or LEED certified kind of label or certification. All right. The B Lab is an accrediting or kind of inspecting body that you apply to for this designation, and you have to show a commitment to certain business practices in measurable social performance, accountability, transparency, and measurable environmental performance. And if you apply and you pay the fees and you go through their accrediting process, then you can use the term certified B Corp when doing business. This is not a legal structure that you apply for from your local Secretary of State. This is sort of a national certification, and you could have presumably any kind of underlying corporation could apply for this. Um, I have not gone through this process for any of my clients. It looks interesting. I haven't had the interest in doing it yet from them, but if you go into this document, it talks a little bit about the pros and cons of doing this. So some of the pros include investors may be more likely to put money into your business if you have this designation, because they can know that you're being responsible and they feel good about that. May lead to some networking and strategic partnerships. So this document talks about some of the larger companies that have qualified for the B Corp designation, like Patagonia, New Belgium Brewing, Etsy, etc. Then they talk about some of the cons too. So one of those, obviously, heightened level of um, scrutiny. All right. So if you label and brand yourself as a more responsible corporation, people are going to hold you to that, right? So I think it's kind of important that if you hold yourself out as a more responsible company, that you actually follow through and know that you will invite more scrutiny. Also, there's a cost involved, right? There's a cost in getting the designation, and there's a time delay involved in that, and then there's a cost to maintaining it. All right. So some different pros and cons here. I think this stuff is really interesting. It's very new in the legal world. The legal world moves very, very slowly. I would expect that we'll see benefit corporations available in Iowa in the next few years. And it's very possible that existing Iowa companies will apply for that B Corp certification status. I don't have any Iowa companies right now that I know of that have done that, but these are additional tools in the toolkit as we strive for more sustainability in business, which is more and more important as we can see every day. So I hope you found this helpful. I hope you are all doing well, studying at home. And if you have any questions about this material, please do let me know. I'm going to throw a couple quick questions, high-level questions on the final exam about this. You don't have to read these things in great detail. Just kind of take a look at this lecture and maybe a kind of a high-level review of the B Corps and Benefit Corps document. I think that one is interesting. And yeah, just let me know if you have any questions. Thanks very much, folks, and I hope you have a great week.